Hey everybody, welcome to my series on religion. So if you don't know, my name is Matt and I run the worst channel on YouTube. It's really terrible. So don't say I didn't warn you. Anyway, if you aren't interested in religion or philosophy, feel free to skip over these videos. They may not be for you. But I've always been interested in these two fields, and so I decided, I'll make some videos on the topics. Maybe I'll be the only one to ever watch these, but who knows. So, this first video I'm making is about my own religion, which is Buddhism. Specifically, these videos are made to show my interpretation of Buddhism, which I tentatively call Centrism. Maybe one day others will think this way too, maybe they won't, but because my beliefs don't really match with other schools of thought, I came up with my own name for it. And originally I was going to make these videos sort of video essays where I would lecture on religion, but to be completely honest, I bored the shit out of myself just trying to make them. Yeah. So, I decided to spice things up and make these more free-form, and even have some jokes in here, and this is just my first episode. I have plenty of things to talk about, and before anybody says it, yes, I'm trying to make better quality videos, better quality audio, that kind of thing. So, yeah, this is my first attempt, so don't judge me too hard. Anyway. So, I expect this series to have many entries, but I promise to try to make them as interesting as I can. Still, if you aren't interested in this type of stuff, you can click away now. So anyway, centrism is my name for my interpretation of Buddhism. So, centrists are Buddhists. I guess you could say I'm the first centrist, quote unquote, at least by name, and this is an introduction to my beliefs. If others would like to become centrists, that's fine, but this is more for me to talk about my philosophies and beliefs. So, first off, what is religion or philosophy about? It sounds like an obvious question, I'm sure, but there could be many answers to this, but honestly, I think they're about happiness overall. Some would say you have to worship a certain god or gods, you'll get into paradise after death, but your life will be miserable and full of challenges. But the goal in the end is still happiness. Others say you worship their god and your life will be blessed. All philosophies are about the pursuit of happiness as well. Even atheism promotes happiness through purely physical means and by abandoning all superstition. Wait, before you go crazy, yes, I do consider atheism to be a religion, but you're free not to think that, okay? But I'll have to save that topic for another video, as this one is pretty long as it is. With that said, Buddhism is also about happiness. For those who don't know, in a nutshell, the Buddha was a spoiled prince, his words, in line to become king. He lived a life of spoiled riches, but didn't find any happiness in this life of luxury. So, he decided to leave the palace, renounce his throne, and pursue a life of monasticism, which at the time meant becoming a Hindu monk. So, the Buddha tried out a strict life of asceticism, trying to be as miserable as possible, even at one point nearly starving himself to death. This was the standard wisdom at the time. Suffering can lead to happiness. The Buddha, whose name was Siddhartha, found out that this too didn't lead to happiness at all, so he abandoned it. Frustrated, he went out to go meditate under a tree, determined to find the solution to human happiness. He didn't get a revelation from a god or anything like that. Instead, he worked on his system himself. And yes, there's a lot of myths tied in with this, but this is just the general narrative. After a long time of meditation, he decided that neither indulgence nor deprivation led to happiness, so he called his new system the Middle Way, which reflected this notion. This is why I call my interpretation of Buddhism Centrism, which is a close English approximation to the Middle Way. Taoism is also concerned with balance between extremes, and therefore Taoism usually blends in well with Buddhism, and Centrism is really no different. Centrism is also closely tied in with Zen Buddhism, which also has elements of Taoism in it. It's also closely related to Gnosticism, but again, that's for another video. So, what does the Middle Way involve? The first teachings are the Four Noble Truths, which we shall get to in a moment. However, just keep in mind that Buddhism is first and foremost about balance. Our highest tenet, the guiding principle for all of our actions and beliefs, is that of balance. We believe that extremes in all forms lead to misery and problems. Okay. Basically, to be balanced, to be in the center, that's the goal and the best way to be, but I'm moving on. The Buddha taught this as well, though these teachings got lost amongst many others. However, this idea can be seen very simply within the Buddha's cosmology. He taught that there were heavens and hells, realms of joy and misery, respectively. But the best one to be born into was the human realm, where there is an equal amount of both. We might go more in depth in future videos, but for now, just know that centrists reject all form of extremes, asceticism, hedonism, extreme right or left political views, etc. Such black and whites often lead to pain, suffering, and evil. Okay, yes, I know. Beyond the guiding tenet of balance, or centrism, we believe in the Four Noble Truths, and accept them as our guiding truths for life. The first truth is that life contains suffering. That is to say, no matter how hard you try, you cannot escape at least some form of pain. Now, keep in mind these are just truths about life, okay? So, that's just the first one, is that life does contain pain. The second truth is that the suffering is caused by delusion and attachment. By not truly understanding the world for what it is, it will lead us to behave in ways that create misery for ourselves and others. The third truth is that there is a possible way to end this suffering once and for all. It is merely that we haven't been looking in the right way. This end to suffering is a mental state called nirvana. The opposite of nirvana, the worldly and default state of mind, what most people are in, is called samsara. The fourth truth is that the end of samsara, this general state of mind that everybody's in, which is the achievement of nirvana, to end that, it can be found by following the Eightfold Path, which is sort of like the 10 Commandments of Buddhism. Wait, before you click away, the Eightfold Path is a path of practice and not a moralistic code that's imposed on you or anyone else. In this way, it's very different from the 10 Commandments, so okay, hopefully you aren't too bored yet. I know. So, the Eightfold Path consists of, first, right view. We strive to see reality as it is, not as we wish it to be or how we fear it is. Then there's right intention, sometimes called right thought. We strive to abandon that which is harmful and loosen the mental connection to samsara, loosening the attachments and delusions that we have. Then there's right speech, which is to avoid harmful, unproductive, and untrue speech. Right action, which is to avoid killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. Right livelihood, to strive to make a living without violating the Eightfold Path. Right effort, which is to try to stop evil thoughts from arising and to cultivate good thoughts. In this case, we define evil being that which brings unhappiness, and usually Buddhists use the term unskillful when it comes to being evil and skillful when it comes to being good, with the idea that skillful things bring happiness, unskillful things bring suffering, but that's just a little terminology for later. Next, there's right mindfulness, which is to strive to live in the present moment without dwelling on the past or looking to the future. And finally, there's right concentration, which is to work to discipline the mind towards such states as the above through meditation and concentration. So these Four Noble Truths, coupled with the principle of balance and the Eightfold Path, formulate the foundation of the Buddhist belief system and centrism. And also, they were more prevalent with most historical Buddhist schools. The thing is that today, culture has really influenced local schools of Buddhism, so most of these foundations often get buried, and so that's why I felt the need to restate them. Now, there's nothing wrong with local culture, but sometimes these outward appearances can distort what Buddhism is about in the first place. So to reiterate, these are not commandments that must be followed. The Buddha merely said that the less we adhere to the Eightfold Path, the more suffering we'll invite. Also, many of these are open to a personal interpretation, such as what is meant by sexual immorality. However, if one believes in the overriding principle of balance being superior to all extremes, in the Four Noble Truths, and adhering to the Eightfold Path, one can call themselves a Buddhist, or, even a centrist. So, Buddhism also focuses heavily on the mind and mental processes. Much of it centered around achieving internal happiness. This is not to say that there aren't supernatural beliefs in Buddhism, and indeed centrism as well. This is important as I don't reject the supernatural outright, as this is an extreme. This goes against the very idea of balance in the first place, in fact, and also part of being balanced has to include being open-minded. And I say this because there are some Buddhists, especially American Buddhists, who reject all supernatural things and ideas, interpreting Buddhism to be just a philosophy, but I don't agree with that. An example is the belief in gods. So the Buddha made many references to the old Vedic or Hindu gods in his sayings and teachings, usually to teach another lesson. Many Buddhists believe that he made these references in order to use the gods as mythic figures in parables, which is a legitimate interpretation. However, the fact that he referenced them so much speaks to the idea that they were important figures in his life. To say that the Buddha taught a non-theistic worldview is therefore really oversimplifying the issue. More correctly, what the Buddha taught was something that is, unsurprisingly, a very balanced viewpoint. The gods and other supernatural beings in some cases can be real, but there is no evidence that they are better or more enlightened than humans are. Also, prayer doesn't work most of the time, and neither do sacrifices to these beings. Therefore, relying on them is wrong. The Buddha taught self-reliance for both material and spiritual needs without outright denying the existence of outside forces. This is also the idea in centrism. So, in fact, the Buddha went one step further, to a point that most other religions would consider blasphemous. The Buddha taught that the gods were just as unsaved and unenlightened as humans were, and that humans were in a better situation to actually become enlightened than the gods were. Now remember, enlightenment is just about the state of mind of nirvana. So he stated that the gods could follow the Eightfold Path as well to eliminate their suffering, as they were also subject to the suffering of the world, up to and including limited lifespans. Yes, the Buddha taught that the gods were impermanent beings who, while they may be long-lived, were not immortal and were just as afraid of death as we are. Another thing that the Buddha taught is the concept of rebirth, that beings are reborn into a new form after they die. Some Buddhists interpret this psychologically, a topic we'll get into in a later episode, but just know that centrists believe that beings are reborn not only after death, but continually through life as well. Rebirth is a continual process, not confined to death. And rebirth is distinct from the similar concept of reincarnation. Reincarnation presupposes a permanent self, whereas rebirth doesn't involve this. That leads us into the next topic of permanence. We'll get more into the self later, but just know that Buddhists believe in an ever-changing self, that we aren't permanent beings. We constantly change and constantly grow and evolve and change. So, regarding permanence, Buddhists in general believe in what's called the 3 marks of existence, which are 3 characteristics that all things share. One of these is impermanence. Buddhists do not believe that anything is permanent, including heaven, hell, love, preferences, or just about anything else. All things change, including ourselves. Thus, we, nor any other being, gods included, is a permanent fixed entity. And this is part of right view, or seeing the world as it is, not as we want it to be. So this is what centrism is, an interpretation of Buddhism that emphasizes the concept of balance and avoiding extremes as the basis of the entire belief system. If you agree with this idea of balance, the Four Noble Truths, and the Eightfold Path, then you just may be a centrist too. So, if this is just one interpretation of Buddhism, why call it something different? Well, really, centrism is still Buddhist. It's just a specific sect of it. But labels are important for defining concepts. Therefore, having a separate name for what I believe is convenient shorthand without much deeper meaning beyond just a label. The other reason for quote-unquote splitting off from Buddhism is that centrism will naturally be more culturally American, as that's where I'm from. While there have been other forms of American Buddhism, I don't really completely agree with all these other interpretations, so I made my own. So this was an introduction to centrism, my interpretation of Buddhism. Plus, I intend to use this series to talk about other things relating to religion and philosophy. Eventually, I'd like to find other centrists out there to form a community, but this may never happen. So mostly this is just about me explaining my interpretation of Buddhism. And as all things are impermanent, it is important to remember that these interpretations and belief are subject to change. So, if this interests you, stick around for updates to the series. Thank you for watching, and if you liked this, please make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe, and do all that stuff. But remember, this is the worst channel on YouTube, so you may not want to subscribe. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to everybody later.